Hey, listeners, and welcome to the You Are Epic podcast. This is where we honor the people who've helped build not just our industry, but our communities. I'm Angela Hucker, and I am so glad that you're here. So, I'm taking the time to sit down with people who've been in construction for years, people who've been through the ups, the downs, and everything in between. You're going to hear real stories of resilience, growth, and moments that shaped who they are. This podcast is for those that want to learn more from people who've been walking this path for some time, and they're helping to lift up others and quietly making a difference along the way. It's also to show you that your journey matters and your voice matters. And in case you've forgotten, you are epic. Let's get into it. So today's guest is Andy Rampton, a global leader in construction innovation and transformation with over 30 years of experience. He began his career in nuclear weapons development before moving into major infrastructure projects in the UK's healthcare and education sectors under public-private finance models. Andy has led business transformation at Lendlease, headed governance for London's Olympic Village, and directed operations for NEO's futuristic city, The Line, in Saudi Arabia. Now Procore's industry transformation leader, Andy is passionate about digital disruption and driving change across the built environment through tech, insight, and bold thinking. So thanks for joining us, Andy. It's a pleasure to have you. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure's mine. Great to be here.
So what I'd love to start with, as I do with all my guests, is I'm always curious to find out, how do people get started in this industry? So I'd love to find out, how did you get started all those years ago?
Well, I noticed when you were reading the intro that there was a bit of a smirk on your face when you mentioned nuclear weapons. And I guess there's not everyone that comes into construction has that at the start of their CV, but that really is where it started. The story behind that is that I grew up in the UK. The village that was my family's historic home was right next door to the UK's nuclear weapons factory.
Wow.
And even though I was doing pretty well at school, I was one of these people that I always wanted to do something practical. So I went to the local factory and did an apprenticeship and became a mechanical engineer.
Okay.
And that factory was the nuclear weapons place. And I ended up finishing my apprenticeship, going on to university and getting a degree. And then I actually spent 16 years there supporting nuclear scientists, developing the plant and equipment that contributed to the making of atomic bombs. So,
Wow.
and that took me into eventually it took me into the infrastructure place. So it went from doing component creation through to creating the buildings and the facilities that these things were made in, and that took me more onto the project management side of it, and then obviously construction is a short step from there, so the rest is history.
Goodness. So it's sort of like you literally fell into it because it was in your hometown.
Exactly. It was right next door. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. You are the first person I've interviewed who's been involved in nuclear weapons. So
I don't imagine there's too many.
No, I don't imagine there is. So it's definitely a very specialized area. So now you're leading the industry transformation with Procore, and I understand you look after the APAC region.
Yeah.
So what's involved with that, with what you're doing now?
Well, look, this is a work of passion for me, and as you say, I've been in construction and property development over 30 years now, and I've been really lucky to work all around the world, and I say that, you know, with a lot of feeling. I have been very lucky, and you get to that point, you get to that time of life where you start thinking about legacy and giving back and that kind of thing. And I got into the kind of policy strategy side of construction about 10 years ago, when we first started using this term digital transformation a lot. And I saw a very different future than the one we had today. So I started getting involved in initiatives that would change the way that the companies that I work for were building and developing. And it's a reflection today that 10 years on, the industry still hasn't changed that much. We're using a lot more technology, but we're not using it in ways that fundamentally change the model. You know, you look at construction, productivity is not going up hugely. We still have a lot of issues around health and safety and mental health and all those things. And so there's still an opportunity for us to shift the industry to a different place. And like I say, you couple that with my, my time of life comment about, wanting to give something back. This role gives me an absolutely fabulous platform now to use some of my experience and help shape the future of the industry, because I really do believe it's a fantastic place to work. It can be a very challenging place to work, but also very rewarding. But it has to change. It has to evolve to become a healthier place to work, a more productive place to work, and somewhere we actually enjoy more of the things that we do on a daily basis.
I agree. And it is challenging. Like, none of us, who've been in the industry this long would deny that. It is challenging, but it is rewarding, because when you can actually see some of those projects, and you being involved with the London's Olympic build and stuff is incredible to actually then see that being used as part of an Olympics game. So
it's amazing, right? It's, my boss at the London Olympics, it was his last project.
Oh, wow.
And we were talking one day about why because he'd given up work in Australia to go and work in the UK specifically for that project. And, we were having that conversation. Why did you do that? And he called it his glass of red wine moment. And he said, this is the project where I'm going to sit in my retirement and have a glass of red wine and think, yeah, that was something special. And you do, if you're lucky enough, you do have those landmark projects where you sit back and think, actually, that I've been part of a team that's created something really meaningful. And that's not just necessarily a building, but it's an experience. The London Olympics, people 20 years later don't necessarily remember the buildings, but they do remember the experience of an Olympics. They remember what happened on the track or on the field. And you can still say that I was part of creating that.
Absolutely. And so with, I'm going to throw a curly question at you now. So with what's happening with, I saw it was just this week that, the government has actually said about the billions of dollars being invested in the Brisbane Olympics. With your involvement of what you've had with the London Olympics, what have you seen with how this has come about with the Brisbane Olympics, and have you got any thoughts in that regards?
It's really interesting, right? That there has been a shift in thinking around Brisbane. The challenge with any Olympics is to make it cost effective. And cost effective really means, how do you create things for the month of the Olympics that then have ongoing social value? So if you build a stadium, it's got to be used. It's got to be useful to the city afterwards. And the thing that was really interesting around Brisbane's original bid is that it was premised on the basis of they weren't going to build huge new amounts of infrastructure. There weren't going to be new stadia. There weren't going to be new venues. They were going to repurpose existing. And that's obviously a very cost-effective way of doing it. And the legacy value is already enshrined in those venues because they already exist and they're already being used. So it's interesting to see Brisbane now going away from that a little bit and talking about there will be. I think that's got challenges. I must admit, I don't know the full detail of the reasoning behind it, but I think it leaves the door open for a future city to say, no, we're going to be the refurbishment Olympics. We're not going to be the new build, because these things soak up so much money, and it's always more money than you think of originally. And I think there is an opportunity for us to do a far more cost-effective Olympics in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, Brisbane's already got a lot of great stadiums and different things in place, because they had, like the Goodwill Games in 2001. I was a part of that. They've had the Commonwealth Games in 2018 on the Gold Coast. So they already have a lot of world-class stadiums available to them as well. So, but it is about that cost effective, because it is taxpayers' money at the end of the day as well.
It is, yeah. And it can be a great platform for a city. But, London 2012, we're 13 years on from London, and the debates are still raging about whether it was money well spent. I mean, whenever I go back to London, I go back to the Olympic Park, and I think it's a truly special place, especially if you understand the history of it and what it was and what it became. It's amazing, but it costs a lot of money, and I don't know if there's any document or report you could point to that says that money was completely justified.
Yeah, because it literally gets into the billions of dollars, which you have to actually go, is this viable for a long-term sustainability perspective as well? So now, something that you touched on, which I'd love to delve into a little bit more about, is that transformation piece, because obviously with what you did with the London Olympics was a massive transformation piece, as you said, from what it was to what it became. And that's now your area of focus with your legacy with industry transformation. What does that kind of look like for you to have positive transformation in the industry?
So transformation is the sexy way of saying change. Sorry, we used to talk about change management, and because we live in a world of hyperbole, now it has to be transformation. But the thing about it is that it really is just about change, and I think there is a tendency to always think that change has to be big. It has to be of scale to create a lasting effect. But my realization over my career is that, and a lot of the sports teams talk about this, a lot of the way to gain real performance improvement is through small incremental change. And so when I talk about transformation, it doesn't need to be wholesale industry transformation, but a series of smaller scale changes that are sustainable, that are more digestible, because when you have little things, they're less confronting than big things. And we've got a better chance of making little things work. So if you have a program of little things, then you can, the overall effect can be much more transformative than one big thing. And so when I talk about change, when I talk about transformation, when I put programs together, I always think, what is the optimum balance between the big stuff and the little stuff?
And there's a saying that it's that 1%. So if you make a 1% difference, the compounding effect of that over a number of years is actually quite huge. But then if you've got, and to your reference about sports teams, and I know there's some, I can't recall who it is off the top of my head, but there was a great coach, and he told his players that if you can just get 1% better after each game, with all the team doing something that's 1% different, and that together, and then over the course of a game, is actually quite huge. And it would be the same for the industry as well.
Yeah. And when you're talking to people about 1%, that's not too hard, is it? But when you're talking to people about, exactly. But when you're talking to people about, we're going to do this transformation program, it's going to take 5 years, and we're going to change the company from A to B, that's confronting. So breaking it down and focusing on the 1% just makes it a lot easier for people to understand and digest, and also commit to. It's not always the best way of doing things, but I think too often we default to big stuff, and there is a lot of benefit in just considering, what is the small stuff I can do differently tomorrow that will have a lasting effect and will contribute to that series of 1%.
So what's some 1% that you believe would be effective and worthwhile for people to embrace?
We talk a lot at the moment about AI, of course. Everybody talks a lot about AI, and I I often get asked the question about, how do how is AI going to transform construction, and how do we go about using it? And I say to people, well, just try it. You know,
Mm.
we tend to get, again, I use that word confronted, we tend to get confronted by AI being this huge thing that has got to look at all the data in a company to be able to work. And what I say to people is just create one use case. Think of one thing that you could do with some help, and then try it in AI and see what the result is. And that's the way I've approached AI in my work. You know, I treat it as a research assistant. I
Mm.
don't put in thousands of bits of data for it to, you know, mull over and then come up with, you know, the future of the planet. I I think to myself, I need to find out more about this, and I put it into AI, and it tells me stuff. And, you know, that's why a lot of it's called generative, because it tells you stuff and then you can iterate
Mm.
around that. You can expand on it, or you can go deeper down a certain thread. And so I think, you know, the use of AI is a good example of the 1% at the moment.
Mm.
And my message to people on that specific item would be, just try it. Identify something that you think it can help with and try it. And if it does help, keep going, or find the next thing and build it that way.
And I agree. I use AI every day just to help me even refine how I word things, because I'll word it a certain way and I'm like, can you just make this a little bit more professional, or,
Yeah.
in this tone, or things like that as well. And it's, then it spits it out, and it may not be 100%, it might be 95%, but it's like, okay, thank you. You've sort of, you've helped me in that regards, and it's a time
Yeah.
saver as well. So,
There's a statistic floating around the construction industry that says 72% of construction companies use less than 50% of their data.
yeah.
And I get a lot of people saying to me, oh, well, we've got to put all of our data into a large language model then, and we've got
Yeah.
to point AI at it. No, you don't. If you start doing that, you'll get lost very quickly.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, your example is absolutely right. Just do something, see the value it creates, do something different, and eventually over time you'll see the opportunity to systemize that behavior and start
Mm.
to use AI as more of a processing tool rather than a research tool. But the journey starts with just doing something and seeing what
Something.
happens.
And it's no different to, in my time, it was Excel. Excel was a tool to help support doing the work. And that's how, in my head, AI can be treated as a tool to help you and support you do your work so you can be
Yeah,
more productive and efficient and effective as well. So, yeah.
definitely.
Have you got any other ideas other than AI?
Oh, look, plenty. I think I think we, again, in construction, we talk a lot about, you know, needing to become more efficient. And um, again, there's lots of processes in construction, lots of ways of working that involve collaboration across teams,
Mm.
and sometimes we don't do those as efficiently. Sometimes there's gaps and overlaps in what we do. And again, companies think they have to re-engineer all of that in one
Mm.
go, because, you know, it all has to be put right. But again, I think the approach of saying, well, maybe it just starts with defining who does what a little bit differently. And
Mm.
I've talked about this in my career. I used to, a while ago, I used to be part of a team that would go around the world setting up major projects. And we used to make sure that the starting point was having absolute clarity around the objectives of the project.
Yeah.
But then the second part was making sure all of the team members knew what they were doing,
Mm.
and doing that audit, if you like, to make sure there were no gaps or overlaps between the roles and responsibilities. And again, people don't tend to think of that. They tend to think of the processes and the technology and the data. But, you know, my advice is start with getting the people aligned.
Yeah.
And again, if the people are aligned and they're collaborating, then the other stuff will follow.
I think that's a big part. And this is something that doesn't seem to necessarily be done particularly well is that having that alignment and getting everyone onto that same page with having that clarity as to what needs to be done and everyone aligned to achieving it. So is that something in your time, like you said, you've been all around the world, you've worked on major projects around the world, quite notable projects and stuff. Where have you seen that done well, and where have you seen it done maybe not so well?
It's interesting, right? It's a mix all over the place. It's a mix. You cannot pick a particular theme, and a lot of it comes down to leadership.
Yeah. Okay.
So you get some, and I'm not going to mention any names, but you get
Of course.
some project leaders that are, you know, they're people at the top of their profession, you know, they're high status people, and that can create a big ego as well.
Mm.
And their approach then to managing or starting up the next project is to walk in the room and think that everybody's just going to listen to them, and they kind of say things and the magic is going to happen.
Yeah.
Whereas a different approach might be to say, well, even though I've got this position, my role is really about making the people underneath me work better. And that creates a far different approach. You realize then that setting up a project has to be worked on as much as delivering the project has to be worked on.
Yeah.
And so I think that the variations are very much down to the project leadership. You can't say, you know, a certain type of product generates a certain response. It's all down to the leadership of the project.
And that's something key, what you've said there. It's setting that foundation right at the beginning. And it's no different to building a building. If you don't have your foundations right, the building's not going to stand.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to run a workshop that we called a mobilization workshop. And it was all about getting everyone in the room, including the project leaders, and saying, okay, we're going to go through a process of defining what the objectives are, defining the roles and responsibilities, defining the key processes. And that gives you that foundation you talk about. But then what you do is you come back a few weeks or a few months later, and you make sure that foundations are still in place and that people's roles and responsibilities do still align, and they still all know what they're doing and how they're contributing to the project. So it is an ongoing process, but it's something, as you say, we wouldn't think twice about, you know, checking how the concrete pour is going. Yeah. But very often we forget to check how our own team is going. Yeah. And I think that is a shift in mindset that probably we need to make at an industry level.
And I think that's something that needs to, there's a lot more focus on it now, obviously, because obviously with the changes in the Workplace Health and Safety Act, with the psychosocial hazards, and recognising, you know, like lack of role clarity is now classed as a psychosocial hazard. So that constant check into how are your people actually going, because you're actually dealing with people's lives here. So it's not just about we're here to get something built and that's it, because if you don't have your people to build it, it's not going to get built. So
we talk about skills and resource gaps in construction today, and you know there are plenty of them, right? It's a big challenge. Attracting and retaining talent in construction is a big challenge today. And then there are various people that talk about the reasons why that is a big challenge. And we talk about health and safety, we talk about work-life balance, we talk about mental health issues. For me, the thing that I hear the most when I talk to construction professionals is that the thing that makes them want to leave is just sheer frustration. Yeah. It's coming to work every day and not really knowing what I'm supposed to do, or not really knowing how I'm contributing to success, or doing stuff that I really shouldn't have to do, or doing it in a way that just is so time consuming and could be done differently if only I could make someone else do something differently. And that frustration, we might kind of consider that in terms of stress and mental health and that kind of thing. But to boil it down to its essence, if we could only define what people do with more clarity and give them the tools to do it more efficiently, then you take away that sheer frustration and automatically the industry becomes different. That essentially, that's another one of those 1%.
It is a 1%, but that's a huge one. That's
I think
massive.
so. I think so.
Yeah.
And very doable, right? We have all of the tools and the technology we need to do that, but there needs to be a will to investigate things on a forensic level that produces that kind of result. And I think the construction industry, we've done things a certain way for so long now. We tend to default to things. So when we start a new project, the team comes together almost automatically, and we don't think about these things in the way that we should be thinking to make sure they work as efficiently as they can.
I agree. And, like the same, I've worked on a lot of projects, and it's kind of like as soon as you get awarded that project, everyone's straight into about, we've got to get this, we've got to do this, we've got to get this ordered, we've got to find our people, we've got to, get our subcontractors in place. And it's all the stuff because you're on the clock and you've got those penalties hanging over your head, and you've got your budget and your time and everything. And it's like, well, hang on, actually just investing that time in your people at the beginning, because that can actually help avoid a lot of the issues as you move into the construction phase as well. I think that's really valuable information.
Yeah. It's a well-known fact that construction monitors progress very carefully.
Oh yes.
It doesn't monitor doing things twice half as carefully. And so you're absolutely right. We get into this team environment and we all get on and do stuff, and we think we're being productive and we make progress. But what we don't realize is a lot of that stuff has to be redone because we just haven't started out with the right definition in the first place. And because we don't measure it, we tend to tolerate it, and then we repeat it next time. And I think it's one of the key contributors to a lack of productivity in construction and frustration, as we've talked about.
And to that, because you mentioned earlier in the conversation about the experience of people and the teams and things like that, what's a example of like a really great team that you've had in your time with the broader range of projects that you've worked on, and what made it a good team for you?
I think, do you know what? This is going to sound strange for someone who's had a career in construction. The best team I worked with was a few years ago. Again, the theme of technology and digital. I was developing a piece of software, which was going to be my company's project management platform. And we started out doing the usual company approach, looking around to see what was available, thinking we'd just buy something and then configure it and it would work. But we wanted to do things a little bit differently. And cut a long story short, our head of digital said, well, why don't we create something ourselves? And so, 25 years into my career, I ended up running a software development team. And that was as close to a high performing team as I've ever experienced.
Wow.
And the reasons for that is that we had a very clear objective of what we were trying to achieve. We also picked people specifically for their contribution to the team rather than their base capabilities. So we put a lot of emphasis on the culture of the team, how people would work together. We didn't always get it right, but when we got it wrong, we made sure we changed it quickly enough so that it didn't become a distraction to the overall team output. And we also, there's a term in software development called agile. And it's very different when you've come from construction, which is all about everybody doing their job, to a program, and nothing allows you to deviate from the program. Well, agile is a very different approach. It's all about having a daily conversation about what you're going to do today and how best to use your resources to produce an outcome.
Yeah.
And that was such an enlightening experience for me because, like I say, I'd never worked in that type of environment before. but it works. We really got to a place where every day was productive because we were only looking a short period of time ahead, and we were making the best of everybody who was available to us on that day. And so that was, yeah, like I say, for a 30-year career in construction, to pick a software development team is a strange one. But I think for me, the learning, the opportunity was then to learn from that and take that back into the construction world, and to change the way I view my teams in the future as a result of that experience.
And I love that, because it's that actual, yes, you knew what the end goal was, but you're adapting every day based on who was available and what you could do to still achieve that end goal, but to be productive and keep everything on track to still achieve what needed to be achieved as well, which is awesome. And that isn't always the case in the industry. So
it's an interesting one, right? Because to work in that agile way,
yeah,
you have to face up to the possibility that you're often wrong.
Yeah.
So, like I say, you're constantly adjusting from day to day. You're adjusting what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And if you come to a Thursday morning and you have the conversation about what you're going to do today, and it turns out to be different than what you thought you were going to do yesterday, then you've got to face up to the fact that you might have got it wrong yesterday. Construction doesn't like admitting it gets it wrong. You know, we plan construction projects weeks and months and years ahead. And like I say, we try our hardest to stay true to the construction program.
Yeah.
And we don't like to think that we got things wrong when we produce that program in the first place. So it is a very different mentality. But as you say, I think there's opportunity for us to learn from different industries and different experiences, different ways of doing things that maybe we're not always open to.
And I think it's the whole thing is that there are other industries who are doing things that, you know, yes, they're not in the construction space, but they've got the same kind of challenges as well with achieving an outcome essentially. And how are they doing it? I mean, you think about Toyota as an example with building cars. I mean, their production line and what they did to actually empower their people in the production line to then make things better. So they had less recalls for their vehicles. So, you know, there's similar industries with similar challenges, which is, okay, theirs is producing a car, but they don't need recalls because it costs them money, and it's no different to building a project and, you know, essentially not getting called for defects and things like that as well, which costs money. So
it's a very relevant example to address the challenges that construction are facing today is learning more from that manufacturing approach. We've talked for a long time in construction now about how do we take a manufacturing approach to construction. Today, every building in construction is thought about in unique terms. You know, we build a hole in the ground and then we start putting things in it. Whereas things like modular and prefabrication, they've been around for a long time, but we haven't adopted them at scale. And, you know, people will argue forever what the reasons for that is. But what you can't argue with is that manufacturing does it right. They turn things out of a consistent quality to a known cost, to a known schedule, time and time again. And so there has to be things that we can learn from that in construction and bring into the way we work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so what I'd love to hear about as well, have you got a standout project that you've been involved in, and it could be for a good reason or a bad reason, whatever it may be, but something that just always is front of mind for you, and it's like, you know, something that for whatever that reason is why that is a standout. I'd love to hear more if you'd love to share.
Yeah, look, I've got the London Olympics is hard to top because
definitely
just the feeling you get from being, you know, you're working on a property development construction project, but you feel like you're part of this Olympic movement. And, you know, I'll always remember the day that we had a little crappy site office, but we were allowed to put the Olympic rings up on the wall.
Oh, wow.
And that's a hell of a process to go through to
Yeah.
get permission to do that. But we were allowed to do it. And the impact that had on everybody working in
Yeah.
that office was utterly amazing. So that was an experience that's hard to top. But if I had to say honestly, I had a year working in Saudi on this incredible project called The Line. And for all kinds of reasons, it was the most intense working experience I've ever had. In lots of ways, the most challenging, but it's such a unique endeavor. You know, it really is a different type of project. Trying to, I'm going to sound a bit like I'm talking from a script of utopia now, but it is about nation building, and the scale of it and the complexity of it made you feel like it was a privilege for you to be involved with.
Yeah.
So that for me would be my standout. And part of that is also the circumstances. You are literally working in a camp in the middle of the desert. You're remote from everything. It kind of creates that siege mentality in the team that, you know, you're in it together, and you've got to make it happen. And that again creates a very unique experience.
I love it. I love it. And it always comes back to, you touched on it before about those environments and, you know, the people that you're working with and stuff, because that is, and the culture, like you said, and getting the foundations right, because that's what can help make a project succeed or not do as well. I won't say fail, but because they'll always achieve the goal ultimately, but it's how they actually get there. So succeed and do it really well where there's a really good team. You know, like I know from my time in the industry, the project teams that I've worked with, and they become a family. And especially if you're in an environment like that in the desert in Saudi, the people who you're there with and you're in a camp, they are essentially like a whole
Yeah.
other family for you, because you're with them more than your own family. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you're, you know, there's good and bad in that. You do create relationships that are, you know,
yeah,
truly unique. There are times where you think, I've seen a bit too much of you lately and I need
yeah,
to
yeah,
escape.
yeah.
But, you know, the good and bad in everything. But I think now that I've stepped away from that, the reflection is hugely positive. And you're right, it's always about the people. It's always about the environment. Yes, in our industry, we can look back at buildings and say, I had a hand in creating that, but really the things that you think about are the people and the relationships and the experience you have during the creation of that building.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the people make it, because there's incredible people in this industry as well. So what would you like to see as an industry transformation person? What sort of transformation would you like to see for this industry moving forward?
I think it's easy to default to technology. I still think the industry has got a lot to do to finally come to this point of digital transformation that we've been talking about for far too long now. But again, going back to the theme of this conversation being about the people, I think we've got to do far more in terms of being an attractive industry to future generations. I think we don't do enough about education. Where we do talk about education, it tends to be at tertiary level, at university degree level. I think I was talking to someone about this the other day. I think if you look at, particularly in Australia, we've talked about the need to invest in STEM subjects. And we've done that. There's been some really good advances in that over the last few years. But we were talking about, wouldn't it be great to be able to put a curriculum together that is targeted at years 10, 11, and 12. And the scenario is a construction project.
Yeah.
And if you think about what people would learn, they would learn about leadership. They would learn about economics and commercial management. They would learn about planning and scheduling. They would learn about design. There's so many facets to construction. And I think the opportunity is we can bring that into secondary schools and we can excite people about our industry, and we can hook them into that industry before they choose their degree subjects. I think when you're already at university, you've already chosen your subject, so that your career path, at least your first career path, is already set. So there's only so much we can influence once they're already at university. But at high school, we have so much more opportunity, and we can portray our industry in so much of a more exciting way. That's the way that we start to attract people into the future. And I'd love to have the opportunity of seeing what the possibility of that is.
Yeah, I agree, because I always go, the construction industry is so varied. It's not just about being on the tools and being a tradesperson. There is a whole, like you've touched on, there is a whole suite of things that support the industry as well, where there's literally a role for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's true. It is everyone as well. It's one of the things, and I'll say this being a bit political now, but one of the things that frustrates the hell out of me is that we have this huge resource gap in construction, and yet we struggle to attract half the population. There's only 13% women in construction today. Yeah. And, that's progress from where it was a few years ago. But it means we're missing out on attracting this huge part of the population into the industry. And, I drive around and I see, when we have traffic controllers on construction sites, they tend to be the young females. Mm-hmm. And you think, that's not just coincidental. There's a theme there. Mm. We give the young females the job of holding the lollipop. Yeah. There has to be more that we can do to attract that generation, but also the female part of that generation, and give them exposure to a much broader understanding of what construction really is about.
And it's the industry advocating for itself as well, to promote that there are all these different roles, that other industries do it, mining do it, defense do it, police do it. All these other industries actually, they'll have their billboards, they'll be promoting and come and have a career, and you can do this and you can do that. And there's all these opportunities. And we actually don't do that in this industry, which is unfortunate, because there's so many roles that are available.
Yeah, I think that in my career, I've seen a definite improvement, but there's so much more we can do. And the opportunity is to make a big step change. It's not just, this is one where we don't need that 1% incremental improvement. Yeah. The opportunity is for a big step change in this space. And I think, again, we got all the tools to do it. We just need to come together as an industry and create that will to do something as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, like we obviously met at the Future of Construction Summit in Brisbane recently, which was great. And I think those sorts of platforms are helping to elevate these sorts of messages as well. So there needs to be perhaps a little bit more government buy-in with this as well, and investing in, just simple things like billboards. Because again, it's like the thing of what you said about putting those Olympic rings in the site office on the thing. It is a bit of that subconscious stuff that's going on, because you're actually letting people know subconsciously what they're actually working towards and the goal they're trying to achieve. So, and
I think we often forget, when we do put our mind to something as a construction industry, we do remarkable things. And you look at the advances that have been made with health and safety over the last 20 years. We're not there yet. We're definitely not at the end of the journey, but the improvements we've made to accident rates, fatalities, thank goodness, have been huge. And that's because we focused on it as an industry. So let's now turn our attention to the next big thing, and we'll pull it off. We've just got to define it and get people interested in working on it.
I love it. And you're spot on. You're spot on. So in closing, I love to ask people this, like, if there was one thing that you could say that it's like, if ever I got the opportunity to tell someone something about this industry or whatever that is, what would that be? And it could be a comment, a phrase, a statement. What would Andy's comment be?
Look, I often reflect back on my career and as we started this conversation, I've ended up doing so much stuff that I never dreamt I would do and certainly never planned. And I reflect back on some of those career conversations you have when you're at high school and those wise old souls that when you start your career, they tell you that you have to plan it. You've got to be in control of your career and you've got to define the next step. My advice to people is don't do that. If
Mm.
you're coming into construction, there's such a broad range of things that you can do. If you plan it, the chances are you'll turn your mind away from another opportunity that might have been more exciting or might have led to something different. So my advice is don't plan, but keep your eyes very open and be aware of those possibilities and don't be afraid to take a jump into doing something different. It can all be within the industry that is construction, but don't start down a path and think you have to remain on that path. I think the beauty of this industry is that you can jump around and you can have very different experiences in lots of different places if you're only open to that.
I love that. I love that. And it's being open to the change, being open to the possibilities, and just knowing that if you start on one path, it's okay if you don't finish that path because you might go on a different path and it might lead you somewhere else as well. So I love that.
Definitely.
That you're never locked in. You are not locked in, and there's always opportunity, and you can travel whichever path you choose. So
100%.
no, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode today. I hope this conversation gave you something that you can take with you, whether it be a little bit of insight, inspiration, or maybe just a reminder that you're not alone. If it resonated with you, please share because we're better when we help build each other up. And remember that your experience, your story, and your journey, it all matters more than you know. Until next time, stay kind, stay connected, and never forget you are epic.